Hi, everyone. You're so welcome along to tonight's presentation where you'll get to hear from the absolutely incredible Brighid Farrell. We're just going to wait another moment or two to allow more people to attend. And this will be recorded. So for anyone that isn't able to attend live tonight, I know we had a few individuals contact us to let us know they were going to watch back the recording. The recording will be available in the very near future up online on AsIAM's YouTube channel. So I'll go on mute now and you'll be getting ready to hear from the incredible Brighid Farrell.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Brighid Farrell. I work for AsIAM on the information line. I'm usually the tech person behind webinars, but this is my first time presenting, so be kind. I'm doing today's presentation on the lived experience of burnout as an adult, and I'm going to be joined in the Q&A and perhaps coming in at times by Amanda, who's also amazing. So starting off, what is autistic burnout? It's an incredibly difficult feeling to describe when you're having it. It feels like you can't. The idea of you can't get out of bed is so co-opted by regular depression that it feels like it doesn't describe it correctly, but there are times when you can't get out of bed, when you can't communicate. It's depression, but depression that affects not only your mind, but your body and your senses in a broader way, as someone who's had both regular depression and autistic burnout. It can mean more meltdowns or shutdowns. It can mean lower sensory tolerance. It can bring up symptoms of generalized anxiety and depression, but something that gets talked about a lot is a loss of skills, whether that's your ability that you've gained to manage sensory issues or to manage your shutdowns and meltdowns, but it can also be things as integral as communication. Often, someone who would usually communicate in a very neurotypical way might need even AAC supports. So burnout can come as after a long period of masking and overstimulation. It can also come at times of massive change. Speaking as someone who's on InfoLine every week, we hear about it a lot, especially in the change from secondary to university and the change from university to whatever you do after university. And I've included a picture of Kiki from Kiki's Delivery Service because I think it's a wonderful film about autistic burnout that isn't meant to be a film about autistic burnout. Kiki is a 13-year-old witch who is sent off to discover her skill. And she has her talking cat friend, Gigi, who you can see in the picture. And she discovers that her skill is flying, and she does a delivery business. And one day she's working too hard in her delivery business, and she's flying in the rain and gets sick. And when she wakes up, she can't fly anymore, and she can't communicate with her cat anymore. And she feels like everything that she was has been taken away from her, and she can't get out of bed, and she doesn't know what to do with her life, and she feels like she's not valuable to society anymore because she doesn't have the skills she used to. And her recovery plan is to go away with her artist friend in the woods and look at crows for a while, which is an excellent plan, but it's not really available to all of us. But when she comes back, she can fly again and she can talk to her cat again. It's an excellent watch. I recommend it to everyone. So this is me in Burnout nearly 5 years ago, which is odd to think about. Almost exactly 5 years ago, it might be. I had been in burnout for a year at this point. I had failed to graduate from university on time. I had to take an extra year. And in the months after I realized I had to take an extra year, I couldn't leave my bed. I was only eating once a day. I was completely alone. I lived in the States, in a different state than my family, about a drive between Dublin and Boston away. And by the time I graduated at the end of the extra year, I fully don't remember that time of my life, but I was experiencing suicidal ideation. I had pneumonia, and I was about 3 days away from fleeing the country to Ireland. But for those of you who are professionals and family members, I don't necessarily look here like I'm at rock bottom. So it's not something that you can necessarily see in a person immediately. So, like many words in the autistic community, in the disability community, it has meanings outside of its disabled sense. Neurotypical people can have burnout, especially around employment. It gets thrown around about employment quite a lot. And in a lot of ways, that makes sense. Not to get too political, but the workplace in capitalism is the masking that we all have to do. We all have to pretend, we all have to put on this face. And I think the working mask is the closest that neurotypical people can understand to the autistic mask. In a workplace burnout, it can affect productivity and attendance. It can come from general overwork. But even in the latest stage capitalism, work is only one part of a person. Autistic burnout affects every part of that person. It affects their work, but it also affects their relationship and their skills, their quality of life, and their basic functioning. So there's an idea that it's all in your head, which is something that's said about a lot of mental illnesses, obviously. But especially for autistic people who may struggle with alexithymia, the struggle to correctly put words to emotions, it can be very hard to describe what's happening during burnout, but there can be a lot of physical symptoms as well. There's exhaustion, which comes along with the generalized anxiety and depression symptoms that come with burnout. There can also be confusion, loss of memory, a loss of long-term memories you're trying to recall in the time, but also in creating new memories. Like I said, in my period of burnout, I don't have a lot of memories. I don't actually remember graduating. It can bring on panic attacks. There can be struggles with sleep and anxiety. There are some that are slightly correlation or causation like aches, for instance. A lot of autistic people have joint pain, and when they're not able to manage their pain as much, they're probably in more pain than they would have been. And with things like weakened immune system, there's also a risk of infection. But that could be because the immune system is weakened by the burnout, but it could also, in the case of my pneumonia, when I was burnt out, it was that I had a cold that I couldn't take care of and became a sinus infection, which I couldn't take care of, and then became pneumonia, which I eventually had to take care of. So moving on to some recovery tips. Doris Raymaker of Portland State University in Oregon in the States did a study based on autistic adults' experiences of recovering from burnout. And on the right is Dr. Neff's recovery tips. She's runs an excellent blog called Insights of a Neurodivergent Clinician, which I very much recommend checking out. And a lot of these are about embracing the autistic community, autistic support, leaning into autistic strengths. And one of the things that I try to explain on the info line to families who are asking, why should my older teen get a diagnosis? Why should my adult child get a diagnosis? What do they gain? A lot of it is understanding and community, because if all of these symptoms are happening to you and you have no idea why, it feels a bit like you're dying. And none of the normal advice helps. Even if you get an excellent therapist for depression, get put on medication for depression, it won't necessarily help you out of burnout. So without that knowledge and autistic support and understanding autistic strengths and weaknesses and what's happening, there's really no way to recover from a problem that you can't put a name to. A lot of this is also about reducing load, which we'll get into more. Often when a person in burnout manages to contact the info line, one of the sad things that we have to go through is that the life that you return to after burnout is not necessarily the life you left. There will be changes. There was a level of masking or a level of stress that you were going through that caused this, and there need to be changes made to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So reducing load during burnout is a way to not only reduce the stress on yourself to help you heal, but also to prepare for the changes that you might have to make once you're out of burnout. Some of these are also something that I know a lot of autistic adults, you don't really make it to autistic adulthood without getting a little bit sick to death of do yoga, go outside, breathing exercises. Some of them can be helpful to people. Some of them might not be. Some of them try to take a more autistic spin on this. Sensory soothing, find what sensory input you have to reduce, what sensory input is supportive to you, engage in activities that are soothing to you. And we'll get more into that as well. And I know when I was going through it, there was always this, feels wrong to put any word to it, but rage that it's not actually as easy as anyone's going to tell you. And as I said, when I was fully burnt out, I made it out of bed about once a day. I ended up getting bed sores at one point. It was a bad time. And there was, at that point, no ability to make these big life decisions when you were trying to figure out, how do I feed myself today? Or how do I tell my parents I need help? And are they going to accept that I need help? It's like a hierarchy of needs. You got to start at the bottom and make your way up to that. And that's much, much easier said than done. We're going to go over spoon theory, which is a helpful way of understanding energy levels and communicating that. I think that's a very helpful thing that I took out of the process of burnout and recovery. You should also think about skills that have helped you in the past, because a lot of these skills are transferable. And these are the very important skills that autistic people should learn throughout childhood, teenagerhood, university, is what works for you to help you through this process. What helps you through tasks in general? What helped you studying for tests? What helped you cleaning as a kid? Some that help me, or I have found help other people. For myself, is breaking down tasks to the smallest possible sections. So each one is a success and you can check off each one. I use an app called Finch, which is somewhat somewhere between like a a productivity app and a Tamagotchi. Like, you put down all of the things you have to do in the day, and there's a little bird, and every time you click one off, the bird celebrates, and each day the bird discovers something new. Today, my bird Pebbles discovered uh, SpongeBob. She does not like it, but that's her choice. One that works for a lot of our ADHD cousins and works for some of us is writing each of them down so you can physically check them off. And of course, taking as many breaks as you need, engaging with your special interests, and building back up those spoons. So spoon theory was come up with by, I believe, a woman with Crohn's, the physical disability, to describe the limited energy and energy loss and gain for people with disabilities and chronic illnesses. Each spoon represents a unit of energy, not necessarily a specific unit of energy. But the theory helps explain how people with disabilities and chronic illnesses have to be very careful with energy or spoon management. During burnout, there are days where you might start the day with very low spoons or no spoons at all. And each time you have to do something, a spoon gets taken away or gained. There are different things that can help gain or collect spoons. My husband, who's an ADHDer, and I will often talk about having spoon collecting days on the weekends where we don't necessarily do much. We just collect spoons for the next week. Activities like engaging in special interests, eating safe for same foods, or just resting. So a lot of this will merge into self-care, which as a neurotypical concept has kind of been co-opted into the yoga, breathing, going for walks, long baths, mindfulness kind of thing. And it's very important to not take that as exactly what it means. That's not the black and white of self-care, and it's not bad if that doesn't work for you. You're not failing at self-care if you don't like the long bath. One thing that my colleague Neve, when I was speaking to her about this program, and she's an occupational therapist by trade, is that especially when recovering from burnout, you have to keep in mind that what's replenishing might not always be what's healthy. Like the healthier option might be going out for a walk, but the more replenishing option might be having a few friends over for drinks. And when you're recovering from burnout, the replenishing option is often the better one because it allows you to get mentally healthier so that in the future you may also become physically healthier. So it's important to focus on the replenishing side. There's, when I do remember my burnout, there's a lot of trying to figure out how to make sensory stimuli that made me happy work for me. One specific memory that I had is one of my best friends' safe food at the time was very American, red Jello. It's just like jelly. And I had it in the fridge, and I came down in the middle of the night having a panic attack, and I ate some of it, and it was so cold, but without any weight to it. It was just light and cold, and it made my body buzz in the way that nice sensory stimuli does. And I kept jelly in the fridge for a long time after that. Also, things like deep pressure can be very helpful. But these sensory stimuli are different for everyone. So think about which sensory stimuli you're happy when you come across and find ways to create it for yourself. Engaging in special interests can sometimes, no matter how much we love them, take energy from us. So think about ways that you can engage in your special interests in low energy ways. This might be watching 4-hour YouTube videos about it, or I watched a lot of documentaries and marathoned TV shows. Find things that bring you joy with low energy input. And in the self-care, a lot of this comes down to reassessing expectations of yourself. Where are you putting energy that you could be putting to recovery? Where is excess energy going? And finding that out and reassigning that energy can also be a part of self-care through this period. A lot of what makes this difficult as an adult is that, unfortunately, we all have lives that don't get to stop when we're burnt out. We continue to have families and partners and jobs and school, and things keep going. A family member or a partner or a friend can be an extremely valuable source of support during burnout. I wouldn't have made it through my burnout without my partner. But when they aren't supportive, it can be honestly more detrimental than it can really put into words when it comes to self-esteem and mood and recovery. Finding someone that you can talk to about burnout and what you need and expectations can be incredibly important. And even if it's just the one person, having that person that you can go to can be an incredible pillar of support. So with this, again, it's about reducing those expectations to help you recover. With a partner, it might be reorganizing who does what chores. When I haven't been in burnout since then, but when I'm having shutdowns, my husband has learned more meals. He's the cleaning and laundry person, and I'm the cooking person. So he's learned more meals so he can help me out on days when I can't manage. It might be giving kids more screen time. They'll survive if it gives you the time to regain energy, to engage with them. A little bit more screen time won't be the end of the world. And finding ways to accomplish enough during your day. Whether that's the colos don't need to be folded if they're sorted, and finding simpler recipes to make for dinner. There's a lot of depression recipes out there, and some of them are quite good. Whether that's, as we'll get into the working and school side, working from home, different ways to accomplish the things you need to accomplish while putting in less energy. Now, in the times that I've had shutdowns and less intense burnout when I've been a working adult, there is one time that I took my burnout to my manager, and she told me, oh, well, we could reduce your hours. It's like, well, if you're not going to reduce my rent, that actually causes more problems than it solves. So this is always a huge concern, is that there's not, it's something we work on as a society and as an organization, that workplaces and universities aren't built for autistic people, and they're not built for people who experience this kind of burnout. So you have to carve a space for yourself. And that's hugely difficult, especially when you're fighting to function. So if there's a manager or someone in your work or a professor at your university who you can trust to talk about this situation, again, that's a massive pillar. Considering your workload, what is the minimum that you can do to get by? And if you can talk to a manager or professor about that, figuring out what the core responsibilities are and how to make those work for you. Finding ways to make the most out of your breaks and weekends and time off, whether not to be cliche, but going on walks during your break, or sitting in quiet during your break, or getting same foods during your lunch, doing those spoon collecting days on the weekend. What are things that help you during this time off? Absolutely do not feel pressured to do any extra things work-wise, whether that's, the pub quizzes, the working weekends, especially if you can talk to someone about this to make sure that you get those breaks that you need. There is also a system called an ERG, which is an employee resource group, which you can request to have started, that if there's enough people, you could have an autistic employee resource group, which is a group of autistic employees figuring out the support that would be helpful for them, what they need, petitioning the employers together. It might be more sustainable for it to be a disabled employees resource group, but it's perhaps when out of burnout, something to bring up to an employer. There are also options when it comes to taking time off, whether that's if it's something that can be accomplished with the sick days that you have. There's also short-term and long-term illness benefit. And it also might, unfortunately, be a situation where you have to rethink if the situation that you're in is the right situation for you, or if this is something that is simply too much. And hopefully that's something that you can accomplish without being a value judgment about your worth, but necessarily just a discussion of whether or not this is something that suits you, because it needs to suit you rather than you suiting it, because you suiting it is what got you into this situation. So, is there any specific therapy for this? There's no one all-encompassing therapy to support you with moving out of burnout. But a neuroaffirmative therapist can definitely help. We've worked with Thriving Autistic quite a lot, and they have neurodivergent therapists. Ones that might especially be helpful would be life coaches who can help you in trying to figure out where exactly the biggest burdens on you are and how those can be changed, and how you can reorganize where you're putting your energy. Likewise, an occupational therapist could be helpful to help you better understand your sensory profile and to help you handle scheduling and daily activities. There are also organizations like AHEAD that can support you with workplace support and educational support. And for anything else, you can call the info line. We're at 818-234-234. We'd be happy to help you. So looking forward, the recovery from immediate burnout is coming back to a sustainable level of energy and skills. It might not be the same level that you were at before, because it might be that that level was never sustainable to begin with. You might have been running too hard on an engine that couldn't take that. It will be reducing load because you were necessarily at a load that you couldn't handle. That was too much. And again, that's not a judgment on you. If anything, it's a judgment on society for forcing that load onto you. Hopefully, you come out with better knowledge and understanding of your needs and your coping mechanisms. In reducing risk of future burnout, a lot of this centers around reassessing where you are. If there's internal relationships with yourself, internalized ableism, internalized essentially how you feel about yourself and society. It's very hard to come out of an autistic life without internalized ableism, internalized ideas about how you're supposed to be and the things that make you valuable. speaking as someone who is always, as a child, referred to as quote unquote high functioning and quote unquote, I was diagnosed with Asperger's when I was 12. A lot of it was that the valuable thing about me and the thing that makes being autistic worth it was that I'm smart and I can manage and I'm not stupid and worthless like those other people. But the minute you enter burnout, you realize that the way that you were smart, that society valued, and the way that you were able to manage in a way that society valued was something that you were trying so hard for all of the time. And that the way you are naturally is valuable as well. And the intelligence that you have naturally is valuable as well, whether or not it's an intelligence that's valued by society or not. I'll never be a woman in STEM. I'll never be that kind of smart. I'll be the kind of smart that does very well at pub quizzes, but it's not a kind that society values very highly. But that's equally as important and equally valuable. And putting stress on myself to be the other kind of an intelligent or a different kind of intelligent will just leave me burnt out. Also considering different relationships in your life, whether that's food or alcohol, things that a lot of autistic people use to cope. If there's ways that you can support your sleep, your health, the sensory environment. One change that I know very much supported me was at this point in my life, I was also moving into my own space and having the ability to control your own space is such a boon to an autistic person. And I have never felt as at peace as when I have control over my environment. Also, considering your expectations around education, career, family, these are big discussions. And they're discussions that probably include people other than yourself. But they're discussions that post burnout do often need to be had. And it's something to consider that maybe the situations you're in are not the situations that suit you or that help you. And they're not situations that are sustainable. There's a lot of discussion in the autistic community as a mask being completely harmful. And personally, there are times when a mask is important, and there are times when a mask is harmful. There are times when, as discussed in work, neurotypical people mask. But we as autistic people have the social expectation that we're masking the whole time. So taking time to consider what your mask is and where it's helping you and where it's hindering you and where it's going too far is definitely another part of reducing that future burnout, because when the mask goes too far, it can start to hurt you and it can start to take you into burnout. So with that being said, I'm going to go into our Q&A and I'm going to ask Amanda to join me to see if she has any answers for questions as well, because I know she's been through this process as well and made it through to the other side with me.
Oh, thank you so much, Bridget. That was actually such a moving presentation as well as super informative. I'm sure everybody will agree. Thank you for sharing all of your lived experiences as well, because I know it's not easy. So a huge thank you. And yes, certainly I have been through burnout myself over the course of my life in particular. And you kind of touched on it as well, through like life transitions when I distinctly remember being in university so I have like a BA, LLB, and I'm undertaking a master's at the moment. But when I was finishing my BA, so my first degree, I remember the last thing I remember was I was going into my exams, I was doing my exams, and I remember I lived in Galway at the time. And this is the piece where I think Bridget, you touched on that sometimes you mightn't even realize that you're in that burnout until it's too late almost. The
Mm.
last thing I can remember, I left the exam hall in the university. I remember walking through the city of Galway. I lived in Salt Hill and I was walking out over the bridge past Jury's Inn, which was down near the Spanish Arch. And that's the very last thing I remember. And then the next thing I remember was my absolutely fabulous, lovely dad. I was living in one of his houses in Salt Hill. He had like apartments and buildings that he owned in Salt Hill. I was living in one of them. And I just remembered it was like a movie. He broke into my bedroom in the apartment or the house where I lived that belonged to him, whereas nobody could find me at all. And I wasn't responding to anybody. And he said it was like looking at somebody like Cinderella. My eyes were open, but I was completely not with it at all. I was lying on the bed with my eyes open, but what I could remember of him coming into the room was it felt like there was somebody very far away calling my name, and it sounded like there was a big bang, but that's all I could remember. I didn't react. I just kept lying there looking up into the ceiling, and he came over, and I remember him shaking, going, Amanda, Amanda, are you okay? So he came up all the way from Mayo to locate where was I or what had happened to me. I think actually I had been on the phone to my mom when I was crossing the bridge at the time, so I had been speaking to someone, and then that was it. And what transpired really was that, again, I wasn't identified as autistic until I was later in life. So they didn't, at the time, everyone was saying, oh, it was just exam stress and whatever. But in hindsight, it was probably everything to do with burnout. And I was going into burnout, and I ended up moving home then directly after my exams. I think that could have been my last exam. I remember moving home then for that summer, and I didn't really work a lot or do. It was like I was kind of convalescing at home with my family.
Mm.
So I remember that was when you were talking earlier about, when you were at your graduation, that it was like you weren't even aware you were in burnout. You couldn't really remember it, your whole graduation. I was like, I still don't know how I got back to Salt Hill. And I lived very close to the pier in Salt Hill. So it was quite a distance to not know. I don't know how I got there. I still don't know how I got there. I must have just luckily been on autopilot. But that was one of the pieces on burnout for me. And then as an adult, the very last time I used to always end up in casualty randomly because I'd feel so desperately unwell. I'd go to the GP. He had no name for what it was I was experiencing. I didn't know what I was experiencing. And the very last time I ever landed in casualty feeling desperately ill and desperately unwell was actually the October before I finally went for an adult autism assessment. And in the hospital, they were saying, we can see you're very, very unwell, but there's nothing that we can identify you as having, or whatever. And they were saying perhaps speaking to a psychologist or whatnot, maybe it's a type of burnout. And then I eventually did go for the adult autism assessment, and then everything made sense. So really everything that Bridget said tonight really touched a nerve with me on a personal level, because they have been my experiences, and all of that really helpful information, and even the website from Dr. Neff that you mentioned. I actually didn't realize that was neurodivergent insights till I typed it in. I was like, oh my god, I love that website. So that's
Yeah.
another excellent recommendations from Bridget all throughout tonight's presentation. And for someone that this is your first presentation, can I just say, I'm in awe. You're absolutely fabulous. I don't think I was half as
Oh,
good in my very first presentation. So huge well done. So yeah, so if there's any questions that both of us, I'm sure would be delighted if we're able at all, and I'm sure we will be, to answer any questions. And I've been answering questions that came into the chat earlier and dropping lots of links into the general chat, and also I'll pop in my own email into the chat, Amanda@asiam.ie, if you have any queries in relation to tonight's presentation, Amanda@asiam.ie. So I know often sometimes on presentations people may feel like they don't want to ask a question. I know I've been answering a few earlier in the night.
mhm.
But if not, you can always ask, you can email myself afterwards, Amanda@asiam.ie. Bridget, is it okay to pop your email into the chat as well?
Oh, yeah, of course. And
Fantastic.
I will actually be on the info line tomorrow. So if anyone would like to call in, I will be on the line tomorrow at 818-234-234.
I can never remember the number. I always use the email. I hope I spelled your name right. Did I spell B-R? Okay. I
Yeah.
thought I spelled Bridget wrong. But if there's no questions, we won't keep anybody too long. But again, if you check the chat there, I've popped in loads of different links to different resources for adults. And actually another one that I didn't pop in, I'm going to pop in family at AsIAm.ie. We've so many incredible programs and resources in our child and family support department. So if you're a parent of a teen in particular, or a younger person, or indeed an older person, please also contact family at AsIAM.ie, and you will speak to either our incredible Jenny Maloney or our absolutely fabulous OT and manager of child and family support, Miss Neve Mellerick. Oh, I just see a question popping in there. What is it you wish people did for you? So I suppose I'll ask you first, Bridget, what do you wish people did for you when you were entering burnout? If there was, say, even one or two things that would have helped you that might support other people to understand.
Well, like Amanda, I wasn't fully diagnosed at the time. I had gone through an autism assessment when I was younger, or they were assessing for Asperger's at the time. But there was no real understanding of what was happening until I got to Ireland and was with my partner. And he's always been incredibly understanding. But I think a huge part of it is just understanding that it is like an illness and there is a recovery process. And as Amanda put it, a convalescence that, well, almost less like an illness and more like a broken bone. Like you put too much stress on a part of you and it snapped, and you need to have it set in its cast and convalesce until you're able to walk on it again. That, much like that broken bone analogy, that if you walk on it too soon, it can make the process of recovery even harder. So trusting them about how much they can take and trying not to push for that, well, one more day won't be too hard and you're already there. And making sure that you respect their limits and their boundaries, and even just being there for them, I think.
And just to add to that, I can give, and again, I 100% agree with everything that Bridget has said. And just something that a psychologist said to me when I did eventually go for that adult autism assessment. And one of those questions he did ask me were, why have you finally decided at 39 to go for an assessment? And I was explaining about all of the many trips to casualty, feeling desperately ill. And that for me as a parent, because I'm a parent to 4 children, 3 of whom are autistic, I said as a parent, I need to know what's wrong with me, as in my health, not as in being autistic, for my
Yeah.
health. And I said it was suggested to me I was going into possibly a burnout. And I said that's why I decided finally to go for an adult autism assessment, because if I was autistic, then I would know how possibly I could better support myself to not continuously land in casualty, essentially. And he said something very interesting to me that I always, and I'm not great for taking even his advice still, even though I really do admire him. He said to me to keep remembering that the body holds up the mind, because he said that I was very cerebral and that and as
Mm.
Bridget will tell you, all behind me is books, my whole office is books and research and autism. That's what I do all day long. I research and I think about autism. But he said to me that I was cerebral. He said, you live in your mind. But he said, remember that the body holds up the mind. And that if I didn't take care of the body, then the mind couldn't do the work that the mind loved to do, which obviously for me was research or whatever it was. But even in the years since, now and again, I suppose what's really been helpful for me, and if I was thinking about advice I could give to people, whether it's for teens, and I know that was coming on the Q&A, or whether it's for adults or for yourself as an autistic person, what I would say, will say is, first of all, if somebody is telling you they're experiencing burnout or they're exhibiting what you may feel is burnout, believe them. That would be the first thing that I would say. Believe them. And then as Bridget would say, like a cast, don't put the pressure on that, oh, look, you've had a rest this weekend, get back out there, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. Take it as it's a convalescence when you're recovering for burnout. Like for myself, when I went home that particular summer after college, and I'm one of 11, so it was a busy house, but luckily my dad was a builder, it was a big house. But I remember I was just up in my room as my daughter Haley, a teenager, would say, chillaxing. I was chilling out. It was long before the time of the internet like we have it now, but I was just relaxing, probably reading a book. But there was no pressure on me to help with my younger brothers and sisters. I could just do whatever. If I did get a job that summer, it was fine. If I didn't want to, it was fine. The point was, for me, I was like a shell of the person that they knew me to be before that happened. So for me, it's everything Bridget has said, and believe the person and maybe support your young person or yourself as an autistic person, for that key phrase that was said to me all those years ago, that the body holds up the mind, or the body holds up, that piece of your mind that maybe, because a lot of autistic people like myself and Bridget would be deep thinkers and really, really, I suppose, analysing and thinking and reprocessing information. And it is a cognitive load. So again, looking at keeping the body healthy, even for myself in recent months, as Bridget will know, I find myself becoming very ill very quickly. I wouldn't say every few weeks, but every 6 to 7 weeks, I'm becoming ill. I know that for myself is a clear marker that I'm going into burnout. So I was just saying to Bridget at the start of the call, I think I've taken just about every multivitamin that's recommended to take today, and I've been taking it all week and taking. Now, I'm not saying anyone should go into hypervitaminosis and take too many vitamins, but I've been actively going to the GP because I cannot, as a parent, and for me, it's always because I'm a parent, I cannot afford to be in burnout. My children,
Yeah.
1000% need me. And I suppose reflectively on my comments earlier, when I was absolutely, when my dad broke down the door to get into my room when I was in college, really, I suppose where I was at that particular moment, I was then in shutdown, where everything shut down. I wasn't able to move. I wasn't able to talk. He brought me home. So that's where you don't want yourself as an autistic person, or for your young person, your child, or your adult or young adult, to end up. So it's really following that pieces of information, and again, contacting the AsIAm information line for more information, and again, direction towards other supports that may be available. I'll just check the chat. I believe there's another question. Someone just says, sorry if it's too late to ask a question. I have
A
trouble with
lot of
using.
it
Oh,
is
sorry.
in this question
Oh, sorry.
is around how long is burnout supposed to last, or how long does it usually last? And asking about how it affects the memory, like I talked about. I think this person references it going on for several years at that point. If it's possible to access a professional like those life coaches at Thriving Autistic, or an OT to help with the managing the day to day, as you were discussing, might be a very good idea for you. I know that's not accessible to everyone, but it seems like you've been working very hard at managing burnout, and getting some assistance for yourself might be the best option.
I would also just suggest, if it's something that almost, again, you say there 4 years, it does sound almost, I suppose I would say, suggest maybe chronic at this point, like a
Mm.
chronic almost burnout. I would also just absolutely recommend visiting your GP, possibly looking into, your own just general health generally, like I would have to myself regularly now at this point. Just also just go and have your general bodily, mental, not mental, but like your bodily health, have your bloods checked or whatnot. Just check, because it sounds like you're quite exhausted. So just, I would always recommend that if it's something that's going on for that period of time, also go visit your GP as well, absolutely, and seek that medical, health advice. Another question is, burnout unavoidable for my autistic daughter, or what can I do around college to help her? Do you want to answer that, Bridget?
I certainly hope that it's avoidable. There's almost a joke in the autistic community that the world has yet to produce a non-traumatized autistic person, or an autistic person without an anxiety. But I think, and I certainly hope, we're getting to the point that we may have created a society that doesn't necessarily force an autistic person to go into burnout. I hope that there are autistic people who have the support systems to never go into burnout. That might be fairyland thinking, but it's certainly a hope. And being there, which is a quite broad idea, but checking in, having conversations with your child while they're away at university, especially if they're away, making sure that, without hovering, obviously letting them live their life, letting them experiment. But one of the struggles that I had when I entered burnout in university and when it seems Amanda entered burnout in university. So that I was far away from family. And as I started burning out, I started sort of losing contact and drifting away from people. So a lot of the symptoms that you can notice from afar are similar symptoms with depression and anxiety. So keeping an eye out for those signs and making sure that even if they draw back from communication, that you're still taking an interest, you're still communicating.
And in the context of the university as well, I know for myself with the masters I'm undertaking with the university in Galway, when I obviously filled out the application form, one of the questions was around disability, and I ticked yes, and I let them know that I was autistic. And when I obviously then, was enrolled and whatnot, I had my own, I suppose, access to, or would say a link person that would happen to be an occupational therapist, and different supports were provided to me and check-ins were provided to me through the disability office. So also checking what's available with your, obviously as well with your daughter's permission, check in with the college what's available on campus for individuals that are neurodivergent or indeed autistic. Because I know for myself, there was different supports provided to me, such as there was this transcribe piece for if I was watching, I didn't always have to attend in person. I had the opportunity that I could just watch back. They gave me recording, I suppose, software. They gave me Grammarly. They gave me so much extra pieces of resources because I had a recognized disability that, I suppose, luckily or unluckily, unfortunately, maybe for my other colleagues or classmates with better language didn't have the opportunity to have, but I did because I had a recognized disability, and it absolutely did support me when I was, say, undertaking exams. I was allowed extra time, or say handing in assignments, I was allowed extra time. And again, if there was any other reason around, I suppose, my disability, I'm sure that would have definitely brought in additional accommodations if I had required them. So definitely check in what's the capacity of the university to provide supports to your child as well. I think would be a very useful piece of advice on top of the fantastic advice from Brighid.
I would just say, piggybacking off that, we will be having another webinar later in the summer on accessing reasonable accommodations in third level. So that's definitely something to keep an eye out for on the back of Amanda's advice.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's actually all our questions for this evening. But
Mhm.
again, you have my email and you have Brighid's email if you'd like to, contact us directly. And again, you have the support email. And I've mentioned the family at AsIAm.ie and adults. Excuse me, I want to read that correctly. Have I done it properly for the adults email? Maybe I haven't put in the adult email, but if you go onto the AsIAm website, there's a direct link for the adult support, and the email will be there as well for yourselves if you're an autistic adult or parent of an autistic adult. So I'll give
And
this final word to you, Brighid.
the recording should be up on YouTube soon enough, but I'll also send out a recording to everyone who signed up, whether you attended or not. And I think that's all. I
And a
think it
huge
went
well
very
done to
well for
Brighid.
my first webinar.
Yes, a huge well done to you, Brighid. If we had
Thank
loads of
you.
applause, I'm sure we would do, but a huge well done. I thought it was fantastic. And thank you to everybody for attending tonight's presentation. So we leave you all go, and thank you again so much for attending, and the recording will be available as soon as possible on the AsIAm YouTube. So thank you very much, and have a lovely evening.
Okay. Bye, guys.